For Pacifica Radio, December the 19th, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com, and I'm the author of the new book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. You can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now, going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show and all the podcatchers and video sites and things out there. You can follow me on Twitter, X, thingamajig, if you dare, at Scott Horton Show. And you can find a bunch of interviews of me lately, if you're interested, on YouTube. Just type my name in there. And welcoming back to the show, Connor Freeman. He is assistant editor at The Institute and at Antiwar.com. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Connor?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks for having me back on.
Very happy to have you here. And we got a lot of bad news to cover. And because of the goings-on in Syria, I think we've been a little bit neglectful of the civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip, which is, of course, the most important thing going on, whether the news cycle says so or not. We have our own news cycle here on Antiwar Radio and at Antiwar.com. So let us know the latest out of the Gaza Strip, please.
Absolutely. So the latest Gaza Health Ministry numbers are about 45,192 people killed, including 17,492 children. Well over 107,000 people have been injured. We're looking at 107,338. And of course, the number of people that are missing or presumed dead under the rubble is still over 11,000. Those numbers are more than a year old in terms of how many people have been missing under the rubble. And the thing you have to keep in mind, of course, is that every time the Gaza Health Ministry puts out these numbers every day around noon local time, accounting for how many people the Israelis have slaughtered over the previous 24-hour period, they always say the same thing, that there are more people who are dead on the streets or buried under the sands or under the rubble, but our civil defense crews and our ambulance crews cannot reach them. And this is because of the way the war is being carried out, because of all the constant airstrikes. And so the most critical thing here to keep in mind is, Gaza is only 25 miles long by 5 miles wide. And according to the UN, as a result of the wholesale destruction of all the infrastructure in the Strip, we are currently looking at a strip of land here that's covered in 40 million tons of rubble. So you can just imagine that after a year and 3 months of this genocidal campaign and the way it's being conducted, the numbers of people who are actually dead under the rubble must be enormous at this point. But the figure still stands at 11,000. But as I say, that's been the case since November of 2023.
Well, and Connor, that's so important because, of course, the common narrative, like you might read in the New York Post, for example, is that all these numbers are exaggerated. And I think they even had a new study proving so. But then there was also a new study by Airwars, which I think argued the other way. Can you talk about those?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Airwars report is devastating. Okay. So this report came out last week, and it found that in the first month of the war on Gaza in October, just the first 25 days of the campaign beginning on October 7th, they looked at 606 incidents of civilian harm and found only 32 to 60 militants had been killed in these strikes. So based on the number of civilians that were killed in the same period, which is over 5,000, it's at 5,139, the civilian casualty to militant ratio is at its most conservative 85 to 1. And the lower estimate of 32 militants killed brings the ratio to 160 to 1. Now, the Zionists and pro-Israel sort of talking heads in the media always say that this is the most humane war that's ever been fought. We have such a better civilian to combatant ratio here, which that we can't avoid killing civilians, but it's such a better ratio than you find in any of these modern wars. And they'll point to America and they'll say that we have a better rate here. But we've all known from looking at the absolute destruction of the Strip, from all the apartment buildings, all of the shelters, all of the schools, all of the hospitals, all of the homes that have been destroyed, the water, the sewage systems, the bakeries, the grocery stores, the marketplaces, everything that's been bombed. We know that they've been killing far more civilians than what they claim, because all of this is based on this artificial number that the Israelis have been using since the beginning of the war, where they'll just make up a number of Hamas fighters that they've killed. And there's a recent story in Haaretz about this as well, about how in the Netzarim corridor, where they're currently carrying out, it's the strip of land that they've created that bisects the northern part of the Strip from the central and southern parts of the Strip. And of course, in the north, since early October, they've been carrying out this extermination plan, this ethnic cleansing plan, where they've basically put the entire area under a full siege. And they are telling people to leave and bombing every last home, every last apartment, every last building that can sustain any kind of life for the people who have already been displaced so many times that they just refuse to leave now because they know the safe zones, they're only just going to get attacked there anyway, whether it's Al-Mawasi or anywhere else in the south. And so they have these kill zones, the IDF has, where they just shoot civilians for fun. They try and see who can kill the most Palestinians in one day. And they just say that if you cross this imaginary line, as we know from previous reporting in 972 magazine, which is a Tel Aviv-based outlet, that they just deem you a militant, even if you're just a civilian. There's a story in this recent Haaretz piece where they riddled a 16-year-old boy with bullets. Just, it sounds like for a minute or two, they just kept shooting and shooting and shooting. And then it was revealed that it was just an innocent, 16-year-old civilian, but he was, documented as a militant killed, I guess a fighting age male or something. Just once they crossed that line, you are now a legitimate target. And this is, part and parcel of the policy of just claiming, as they did early on in the war, they'll say, we killed 5,000 Hamas militants, we killed 7,000. So if you go by those IDF numbers, then you can artificially create this propaganda that they're actually killing militants, but it's civilians are being killed, but it's light collateral damage in the process of our war on Hamas. But of course, it's not a war on Hamas. It's a war on the Palestinian civilians, these Muslims and Christians, the indigenous population of Palestine, who, these people were ethnically cleansed into Gaza after the Nakba in 1948. These are mostly refugees or the children and grandchildren of refugees, and they're being exterminated. Particularly in the north right now under what's called the General's Plan, which was promoted by Giora Island, a former major general in the IDF. And they have, like I said, they're starving the people out, destroying all the hospitals, destroying all the homes, and then making sure that they can never return. And those are the areas where it appears that settlement expansion will begin first. And we've been seeing reports in recent weeks, Scott, of Israeli settlers and settler leaders, taking tours of the Gaza Strip, scouting out locations for when they're going to move in. And of course, the worst hawks in Netanyahu's coalition, including Bezalel Smotrich, are thrilled at the prospect of the Donald Trump administration because they believe he will support them in their efforts to settle Gaza, let alone the West Bank. But that's more off in the future. I think they're going to really move into Gaza first.
All right, it's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with Connor Freeman from Antiwar.com. And this thing about the Free Fire Zone here, again, it's the top headline at Antiwar.com today, but it's from Haaretz. It's Israeli journalism. They're essentially the New York Times of Israel for all the good and bad that connotates there, I guess. But this is not some made up stuff. Anybody can go and check the resources yourself firsthand. This is Israeli military sources talking to probably the most important Israeli newspaper. telling them that this is how they do it. And, you know, what you describe is exactly like what happened in Bucha in Ukraine, this suburb of Kiev, just at the time of, or a small city, you know, adjacent to it, just at the time that they were scotching the peace talks and making sure to prolong the war in the spring of 2022. And the Russians had committed an atrocity where they did exactly this same thing. They called it, they had an imaginary line, and then they said that any person who crosses this line, it's okay to blow them away, even if it's a lady on a bicycle. And the New York Times, I'll give them the credit for it. It's clearly solid reporting that they did on this, where at least a solid dozen or 2 dozen, I forget the exact number, but it was somewhere around there, of people who had ridden down this street. Once they got to the corner, they were blown away by the Russian forces. Now, they claim military necessity because they were about to invade down that street and they needed to keep it clear. That was their excuse for it. But at the time, Connor, the U.S. government called that genocide in Bucha, I'm sorry, I always say it wrong. And they use that as an excuse to ruin the talks. They said you can't have peace talks with people who are so brutal that they would kill so many civilians. You have to keep a war against the enemy like that going. Everybody follow the logic there? And so instead of ending the war, they've gotten hundreds of thousands more people killed and wounded since then in this horrific war as it's been going on in Ukraine since then. But that was what they said. They said to have a free fire zone like this and kill a couple of dozen people, have an imaginary line that civilians can't see that'll get them blown away for crossing it. That's the ultimate evil, according to the U.S. government, when Russia does it in Ukraine. And yet that's the exact same thing that you're talking about here. Only you're not talking about this going on for a week or 4 or 5 days or whatever it was here. You're talking about this going on for now a year in a row, or on this particular line. How long is it? Do they say that in there? How long this particular line has been drawn there and that they kill people in this way?
Well, the report that I was referring to from 972 Mag from earlier in the year, that was back in July. And this was when they were interviewing IDF soldiers who discussed how they were they get bored and they just start shooting Palestinians. And so this has been going on for months and months. And I imagine it's only gotten drastically worse since the general's plan was implemented in the north. And that would have been since early October. So we're looking at approximately at least 6 months of these policies. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's more likely that we just got the reporting at that time.
And now, but this is the same story that's being now reaffirmed by Haaretz in this piece.
Exactly,
is that right?
Exactly.
So in other words, so that establishes that it's been going on at least in the time between then and, you know, leading up to that first report and since. So the better part of a year at minimum, right?
Yes. And I should clarify that regarding the Airwars report, you know, I was talking about the Israeli the pro-Israel hawks in the United States who do so much lying about the civilian to combatant ratio that I got a little bit sidetracked. But what's important here is that in the report, they explain, Airwars does, that based on their data, this is nearly 4 times more civilians reported killed in a single month than in any conflict Airwars has documented since it was established in 2014. So out of those 5,139 civilians that were killed, 1,900 of them were children. And so this is nearly 7 times higher, Airwars says, than even the most deadly month for children previously recorded by Airwars in any conflict zone. And 1,213 women were killed in those same 606 incidents. And they say women and children are primarily being killed in residential at least in this data set, primarily killed in residential buildings in strikes where, you know, they're killing many members of the same family. We hear reports constantly out of Gaza where, like, in one strike, an extended family just gets wiped out. So they say families were killed together in unprecedented numbers and in their homes. More than 9 out of 10 women and children were killed in residential buildings. In more than 95% of all cases where a woman was killed, at least one child was also killed. And this is why we've seen since we've been following this war since it began, that the primary victims here are in fact women and children, and not Hamas militants. I mean, it's the biggest lie ever that this is a war on Hamas. As you and I have documented in our article, Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. The Likud party has never had any problem supporting Hamas. This is capitalizing on a casus belli of the October 7th attack on military and civilian targets back on October 7th, when Hamas broke out of the Gaza prison, and they've been using this as the excuse to carry out a predetermined annexationist agenda, which is favored now more than ever within Israel's far-right coalition. As I mentioned, Bezalel Smotrich earlier, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, and a whole host of Likudnik MKs and ministers who are promoting this kind of a policy. And they have these, Resettle Gaza conferences where they just will flat out tell you exactly what their plans are. And they're going to go into Gaza and settle with hundreds and hundreds of families. They're going to take these people's land. In fact, there's this there's a lot of hype currently about a potential ceasefire agreement being inked between Hamas and Israel before Donald Trump enters the Oval Office, because, well, for one thing, Donald Trump has threatened that, get this, his message to the people of Gaza is, if they don't release the hostages, because as he said, everybody's talking about the hostages, it's all you ever hear, then if they don't do that, then there's going to be all hell to pay in Gaza. What more can you do to these people? According to the 99 American doctors and surgeons and nurses and nurse practitioners who've spent a combined, over 250 weeks in Gaza, their open letter to Joe Biden back in October said that the death toll is at least over 118,000, including tens of thousands of people who have starved to death as a result of the brutal siege, blocking all medical equipment and food and other vital humanitarian aid into the Strip. And, they also talk about the fact that, we mentioned earlier the kill zones and how they're shooting Palestinians for fun here and trying to see who can kill the most in one day, or which unit can beat the other unit and how many Palestinians they can kill in a day. As one of the quotes from that article from Haaretz is, if one unit kills 150, then we have to try and kill 200 the next time. And but they mentioned that these doctors and these nurses, that every single day, every single one of them treated children who had been shot in the head and in the chest. And they're not talking about, like, you'll often hear from the pro-Israel side here, oh, children, right? Yeah, what age were they? Implying that if they're teenagers or something, they're not really kids. But this is, according to the doctors, we're not talking about teenagers. We're talking about toddlers being shot in the head. And shot in the head twice, or shot in the head and the chest. And they make clear these are some of the most highly trained snipers in the world. This is the IDF we're talking about. Nobody shoots a toddler in the head by accident, or a toddler in the chest and the head by accident. This is all deliberate and would happen multiple times every single day. As Dr. Mark Perlmutter pointed out, this becomes a regular occurrence. I mean, he even said one of the most horrific lines from that letter is, Gaza is the first time I held a baby's brains in my hand, the first of many. They all make clear, by the way, that when they got to Gaza, the level of carnage that they witnessed and mayhem dwarfed anything that they had ever seen before in any other conflict zone after any sort of natural disaster, or at ground zero after 9/11. It's just the level of carnage being unleashed upon the Palestinian people, men, women, and children, is unfathomable, this ultra violence.
All right, hold it right there.
Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. real history, real economics, real education.
Well, I guess it was just a matter of time. I drank so much coffee I turned into some. Hey guys, check out the Scott Horton Show special blend at MoondosArtisanCoffee.com. It's a blend of organically grown Ethiopian and Sumatran coffee beans. Two very different coffees combined to create a unique blend. Ethiopia is smooth and medium-bodied. Sumatra, rich, heavy-bodied coffee. And it's got caffeine, lots of it, which is good for if you have to drive drunk or get up in the morning. Click through from the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org to save 10% on your order. It's the Scott Horton Show blend from Mundo's Artisan Coffee. And for a limited time this Christmas, check out their cinnamon orange coffee. It's Mexican Chiapas beans with cinnamon, orange peels, and buttercream. That's all at MoondosArtisanCoffees.com. It's Antiwar Radio on KPFK in LA. I'm talking with Connor Freeman from Antiwar.com. And Connor, I have a clip here of Dr. Mark Perlmutter talking to a journalist here. It's a short clip, and I just thought if we're going to make these claims, let's go ahead and hear it from the horse's mouth if we can.
You're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers.
Definitively. I have two children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots. All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week.
Shredded?
Shredded.
What do you mean?
Missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority. We've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds, and then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
It's the sickest thing in the world.
We've seen video after video live streamed into every American home, anybody that has an internet connection, laptop or a phone, and you've seen countless videos of children pulled out of rubble who have had just this experience and they're dead. And this is what the American government is unleashing upon the Palestinian people in front of the whole world. It's extermination.
And look, that's maybe the most important point of all here is the responsibility of President Joe Biden and his government for all this. But how do you make that connection? Aren't we talking about what the government of Israel is doing, Connor Freeman?
Yeah, well, the American people should know that we're funding 70% of this entire war. And you can look at, there's several Israeli sources on this. One of the top Air Force officials told Haaretz a couple of months ago that, look, without constant American aid, we couldn't sustain these operations for more than a few months. And if you look at the amount of money that's been spent on the war, it's 70%. Every single dollar, 70 cents of it is American money. And again, this is the case that for many years, the United States has provided 69% of all of Israel's military aid. The Germans pick up the rest of they pick up about 30% of that, and then the rest is from other sources. But it's absolutely the Americans' war. We provide the intelligence, we provide the diplomatic support, we provide thousands and thousands of 2,000-pound bombs, the bunker busters, the planes, all the different kinds of guns and munitions and the tank shells and the artillery. And we're constantly told that this is just indispensable. This is our greatest ally. When in fact, and again, this is the most important thing for people to understand, is that we are exterminating the Palestinian people in front of the whole world. There's no ambiguity about it whatsoever. Amnesty International just came out with a report saying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. This is the top human rights organization.
Well, and Human Rights Watch, too. Brand new out yesterday. Human
Absolutely.
Rights Watch and Amnesty both now. And I'm sorry because we're so short on time. We're doing live radio here. in LA on KPFK. We got Connor Freeman from Antiwar.com, and we got to talk about Israel in Syria. We can't do the whole Syria war, but ever since Al-Qaeda overthrew the government in Damascus a couple of weeks ago, the Israelis have, one, been bombing the place, and two, making moves on the ground. So please catch us up with that, Connor.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, after he fled to Russia, Benjamin Netanyahu put out a video celebrating how great this is, calling it a historic day for the Middle East and saying, this wouldn't have been possible. Just like Joe Biden. Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu have been patting Netanyahu on the back, saying this would have been impossible had we not decimated Hezbollah and taken on Iran and other elements of the axis of resistance. And we're the ones who put Assad in such a defenseless position, with Hezbollah not able to back him up and support him here against the jihadists. We're the reason that Jilani is sitting on the throne. Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, the former ISIS deputy commander under Baghdadi, and founder of the Syrian Al-Qaeda affiliate, the Al-Nusra Front, which is what HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is. It's just been rebranded because he's following a sort of Western playbook in terms of the public relations here, so that they can get away with, pretty soon, Scott, they're talking about, apparently American officials in Politico, it says they're scrambling to find out how and when and how soon we can lift the terrorist designation on HTS. And there's still a $10 million bounty on Jilani's head. This guy is as Al-Qaeda as they come. And he's now sitting on the throne in Damascus. Now, Israel immediately after the Assad regime fell began launching massive airstrikes on all of the military equipment, the air defenses, the warehouses, the ammo depots, the bases that were left behind by the Syrians in Tartus and Latakia and Damascus and Homs and Palmyra. And they've, at this point, carried out over 800 airstrikes in Syria. One in Tartus, and Dave DeCamp covered this at antiwar.com, just this past weekend. I guess it was on the page on Monday. They bombed Tartus with a bomb so large it caused I believe it was a 3.1 earthquake on the Richter scale.
Well, yeah, because they hit a weapons depot, right? Is what happened. Yeah.
But still, apparently civilians, according to Al-Mayadeen, I believe the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, they said that civilians were killed in this strike as well. And
I would not be surprised at that if anybody saw that footage. Yeah, some amateurs thought it must have been a nuke to have been that big. It was not. But it was a mushroom cloud. It was a massive explosion.
Yes, and now they're surging the illegal settlement of the occupied Golan Heights, of course. Never let a crisis go to waste. But they've also expanded beyond the occupied Golan Heights, and they're taking the buffer zone, which was run by UNDOF, the UN disengagement observation force, since 1974. And their argument is that the Syrians guarding their side of the line here, of the buffer zone, which separates the Golan Heights from the rest of Syria, they're no longer there. So the Israelis have taken the opportunity to go into the buffer zone, take the land there, and now they're expanding beyond that territory, and they've come apparently within 15 kilometers of Damascus,
including taking Mount Hermon.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Yes, and they're saying that this is going to be an indefinite occupation as long as it takes. And get this, they're saying that they have to do this because, first of all, they need to have a better vantage point on defending against threats from Hezbollah, but also from the jihadists that Netanyahu is just backslapping himself for helping put in power.
Isn't that great? And so think about that, everybody. So as bad as it was with Israel bombing Syria all the time, they're usually bombing, they would say, and I guess credibly some of the time, that it was when Iran would be transferring weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's what they would hit. But they never did this kind of general air war against all of Syria's national military resources like this. Not even during the last dirty war 10 years ago did they do anything to go that far to absolutely destroy and cripple the Syrian military state. And here they didn't until their favored faction and America's favored faction, because it's their favored faction, Al-Qaeda in Syria, succeed in taking Damascus. And as soon as they do, they go, well, we got to bomb all that. We can't let this equipment fall into terrorist hands, can we? And they blow it all up. In other words, conceding that the new guys are way worse than the old guys. Isn't the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, a completely pwned American and Israeli and Turkish satrap. And so then, therefore, why should anyone be concerned about him or his men at all, Connor, do you think?
Well, in fact, he's boasting about how he'll never let Syria become a launching pad, as he says, for attacks on Israel. And he makes the point that our enemies are Hezbollah, the former Assad regime, and the Iranian militias. That's who their enemy is. And it's always important to remember, and this is why I say it's so important to keep in mind that we're exterminating the Palestinians in front of the whole world. This has long been a strong Al-Qaeda grievance. I mean, the lead hijackers on 9/11 flew those planes into the towers because of America's support for Israel's brutal occupation and wars in southern Lebanon and in Palestine.
Well, it sounds like the Israelis are taking the truth of that into account. That's why they're bombing what used to be Assad's army now. All right. Well, it's Anti-War Radio. You can't win them all, or maybe any of them. Thank you very much for your time, Connor. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, you guys. And I forgot to do this, but so please, since I didn't spend the time, donate a bunch of extra money to KPFK. It's the end of the year fund drive up here. We need money to make the radio station go. So please do your part if you can. Dig deep and help support KPFK. That's kpfk.org. And this is Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm at antiwar.com, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll be back here next Thursday from 2:30 to 3 for Anti-War Radio on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.